All right, perfect. Christine, I'll let you get started.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for attending our presentation. If you'd like to follow along with our slides on your own device, we're going to pop a link to our presentation just in the chat box, so check there in a few moments for that. There we go. So now I imagine many of you are here this morning for similar reasons. Since March 2020, we've all faced the void of online learning, whether as students or as educators, or maybe even as both. So Julia, Kevin, and I have faced this void as early career librarians, and we've lived to tell the tale. And we've had some help with our friend Bear Grylls, who is pictured below on that screen right there. So just on to slide number 2 now. Awesome. So before we get to our formal introductions, we wanted to take a moment to explain how we came to our title and to the structure of our presentation. So initially we were amused by the improvise, adapt, overcome meme you may have seen online. This meme features Bear Grylls from that first slide, who's a former serviceman of the British Secret Air Service, or SAS, and a survival instructor who popularized the phrase on his survival show, Man vs. Wild. An intense photo of Grylls is often paired with a hilarious non-survival related adversity, and we thought we would play with that image a bit. As we learned more about the improvise, adapt, overcome approach, we realized we've all been using it since March 2020. At first, librarians needed to improvise to continue with services. This stage represents the initial response to adversity, where you use whatever resources are available to you at the time and push through the first feelings of shock. Next, you adapt to your situation. This stage involves adjusting your initial response, getting creative with new solutions, and staying open-minded to different opportunities. Last, you overcome your own mental barriers and accept the new path that you're following. In this stage, you need to focus on the situation itself, reflect on what you've done to reach this point, and to identify ways to continue forward. So ultimately, the goal here isn't to defeat a problem entirely. In a case like this pandemic, the problem will not disappear overnight. However, it is in our control to overcome the problem as best as we can and to find alternative solutions. So we're going to use this time as a chance to talk shop with other professionals, and we're going to highlight ways that we've adapted to this online environment, specifically with teaching undergraduate students. We're all early career professionals on this panel, so we're also going to touch on how we're developing our own teaching philosophies in these interesting times. So without further ado, we'll just give you some more context about the three of us. So I'm going to turn things over to Julia first.
Perfect. Thank you, Christine. So hello, my name is Julia Martyniuk, and I am the teaching and learning librarian for the STEM discipline here at Western University. This is just a picture from back before COVID when I was up in the Rockies. So, wishing for the days that we can go back to that. I am an early career librarian, like Christine mentioned, and I began my second academic librarian role in May of 2020 amid the pandemic. My previous experience had been all in person with limited online support beyond emails and research guides. Starting while in lockdown was akin to being thrown into the deep end of online teaching and learning. Adapting in-person lessons to online was not always seamless, but I was able to learn from my mistakes, learn from my colleagues at Western, and learn from the library community through professional development opportunities such as this. We are all struggling to adapt to this new environment, and the mental and emotional toll is heightened due to the pandemic. I think it is important to acknowledge that perfection is not the goal in this case. Instead, we should be focusing on ways to meet students where they are at in ways that they can ingest information, because again, these are not the circumstances that we are used to, and students aren't learning and absorbing information in the same ways either. Back to you, Christine.
All right, so hello again. My name is Christine Moffatt, and I'm the newly minted Engineering and Entrepreneurship Liaison Librarian at the University of Waterloo. The accent photo on my slide here is from Makoto Shinkai's 5 centimeters per second, so if I have any anime fans out there, you can drop me a line as well. I graduated into what I call a roller coaster experience in April 2020. So I was a student during the sudden shift to an entirely online learning environment and graduated into a job hunting landscape that was pretty bonkers, to put it mildly. I was fortunate to start working as a full-time LAS professional later in the year. During this time, I've been in a unique position to see the struggles on both sides of academic librarianship during the pandemic. And I think my main takeaway from this experience is to do everything from a place of empathy for students, for faculty, for colleagues, and most importantly, for yourself as well. We're all doing what we can with what we have, and I want to respond with compassion without losing focus on student learning as well. So now I will turn things over to Kevin.
Great, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Kevin Oswald. I am currently a co-op student with the teaching and learning team at Western Libraries. My photo here is a photo of the Western campus, which I miss dearly, and I hope that I have the opportunity to be back on campus sometime soon. Many people have asked me over the last 8 months, whether the co-op experience has suffered because of remote work, which I've been entirely remote this entire time. And I would actually argue otherwise. The support has been incredible. The experience has been numerous and quite unique. I've been able to go down the journey of delivering instruction virtually with even the most tenured librarians. And I feel like I've had the opportunity and privilege to see the best and the worst. In the fall term, I've delivered several synchronous information literacy sessions with varying degrees of success. I presented into the void. I felt that disconcerted feeling of seeing only my face in a bunch of black screens. I've struggled to engage groups I was speaking with, but I've also had the opportunity to reflect, learn, and ask peers and listen to multiple people in order to avoid some of the pitfalls that we've all encountered. I've had the opportunity to refine my teaching style and have pushed forward with great success. And finally, I've learned just not to take it personally, and not always blame online learning, and just recognize that, this is something that we're all dealing with. These are all new dynamics that we all go through together. Zoom fatigue is certainly quite real. And before we jump forward here, I just want to take a quick second. We just want to thank the organizers of the eLearning Libraries Symposium for giving us the opportunity to speak about some of what we've learned today. We certainly hope that today will feel conversational. We look forward to hearing stories of success and failure as we continue learning and sharing best practices across the profession.
All right, so the presentation agenda. Before we get into the agenda, I just wanted to set a clear guideline for the rules of engagement with this session. We are moderating the chat. So if you have any questions, please pop them in there, and we'll be taking points throughout the presentation to answer questions and ask you questions as well. There's going to be some participation. During the question period, if you don't want to pop it into chat, please feel free to raise your hand. And once we call upon you, then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. All right, so I'll proceed with the presentation agenda. So we're going to start off with welcome to the void. Then we're going to get into in-person instruction versus online sessions, student engagement in an online environment, some tips, tricks, and hacks, followed by teaching philosophies and ending on future thinking. So, Kevin?
Yep, awesome. Thank you so much. So welcome to the void. As we get started today, we definitely thought it would be great to have a little bit of fun and play a really quick game of Never Have I Ever. So Julia is going to put a poll up in front of you here. Definitely don't overthink the questions here. We just want to, see what the group here has experienced.
Okay, the results are starting to come in. I was worried at first.
Feels almost like a horse race when you see the bars moving too.
Just give it a few more seconds here.
I think once we get to 75% of participants answered, so 10 more percent.
Sounds great. Holly, that's a great one. I've seen a lot of cats in the last 8 months, that's for sure.
All right, we're at 74. One more answer, 75. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll now and we can share the results with you. And we can go ahead and take a look at those.
Awesome. Thank you so much for filling that out and having a little fun with us here this morning. So, taking a quick look here, it's really interesting that we've had so many of the similar experiences. So we have, most of us have had tech issues. Most of us have been in a Zoom meeting where most of our cameras are off. And most of us have had to adjust our plans on the fly during online presentations for, any number of reasons. So Julia, Christine, thinking about these results, does anything stick out to you, or do you have any stories or experiences you might want to share?
I was going to say, I'm glad to see that so few people have been Zoom bombed. I was in a presentation where we did get Zoom bombed, and thankfully we had the participant chat set to only like participants could see chat messages. So thankfully it didn't interrupt any attendees. But yeah, that was an interesting experience trying to troubleshoot on the fly while you're like, mid-hosting of a presentation. So I am glad that there's been fewer instances of that. So congrats folks as well.
I mean, it's just to show that like we're all experiencing this. It's part of like the chaos that is online teaching, I think, right? And it's always interesting and new.
Yeah, I see some interesting experiences in the chat here. Lots of pet therapy sessions, which I think is a great way to put it. Daisy, I love the thoughts and story around muting the VIP mid conversation. There's just a lot more going on. With managing a chat, managing your participants, and just so much going on online where sometimes you can just kind of get in the zone when you're up in front of a class. So we'll take another 30 seconds here maybe and see if anybody else has any interesting stories that they might want to share, or fun successes or failures. We have a senior manager that tells us to, really embrace the silence. So that's what we're trying to do here. Nicola talks about trying to keep the kids quiet while teaching. Certainly, I don't have any kids in my house alone, but I do have a small Chihuahua small Chihuahua with a big voice. He's definitely my guard dog and looks outside, and even if a leaf blows by, we'll hear from him. So I hear that.
Oh gosh, and Jennifer is saying the power in her house flickers every week or so, which means that the router shuts down. Oh man, that's been one of my kind of worst case scenarios. I haven't had it flick out during a presentation, but that's always been my greatest fear. Oh
I will say that's happened to me the last session that I presented for the fall term. My internet died twice during the presentation, and you just have to go with it. All right, I think we can go on, but I just love these stories. It just goes to show we're all going through this.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. So I'm going to proceed. So in-person instruction versus online sessions. Although there can be similar issues that come up in in-person and online instruction, such as difficulty in connecting with students during one-shot sessions, these problems do feel enhanced in an online environment. In-person instruction is a familiar learning environment and experience for both students and instructors. We receive instant feedback in the form of body language, facial expressions, and tone, and can adjust our instruction by reading the room. It is often easier to invite participation in person, facilitate discussion, and encourage active learning. In-person instruction also allows for after-class conversations and questions, which is especially important for students who are uncomfortable asking questions in front of the whole class, or simply had time to digest the information presented to them. However, these are typically only one-shot sessions when we're doing them in person with no further connection to the student unless we are integrated into the learning or course management system, which meant that only the more enfranchised students would reach out for additional help. Online instruction is different in many regards, whether it be synchronous or asynchronous. Teaching online requires intentional, thoughtful approach to instructional design, especially in a time when students are being asked to transition at an unprecedented pace in the wake of the COVID-19 outbreak. Preparing for synchronous sessions or producing asynchronous material does take longer and requires more effort, especially when translating content into an online format. It can feel like we have less time to experiment with our instruction. It can be difficult to gauge engagement and know whether or not students are grasping the content, especially when teaching into the void. Online instruction, in particular asynchronous content, does allow for flexibility in format since you can utilize a number of different delivery methods, but it needs to be curated to students' needs and carefully decided upon as not to overwhelm students. In synchronous sessions, there's a lot of multitasking required of instructors and meeting hosts, from ensuring no technical hiccups occur to moderating chats and explaining concepts, in addition to presenting the content and facilitating discussion. So student engagement in an online environment. Our online environment is a lot different, and it's easy to get discouraged by these abrupt changes and by the reality that online success rates often still lag behind those of face-to-face classes. Online learning during a global pandemic requires a lot of mental energy. The environmental cues we're usually used to in learning environments are gone, and many folks are struggling with concentrating when working from home. One of the biggest barriers to achieving equivalent success rates in online learning has been tackling the challenge of cultivating the sort of collaboration, engagement, and discussion that are often the hallmark of great teaching and learning environments. So I just wanted to go through a couple of things in order to encourage and promote student engagement when we are teaching online sessions, whether they be synchronous or asynchronous. So one of the first things is rules of engagement, and we went through this within our own presentation. It's important to establish simple, clear, and consistent requirements / rules for engagement in your online instruction, whether synchronous or asynchronous, so students know what's expected of them. Less is often more in the online environment. Online learning demands a lot from our students, and it can be easy and tempting to overload our lessons. Just teach what students need to learn and know in order to achieve your learning outcomes. We do not want to overburden our students' cognitive mode. Utilizing chunking and repetition of content is great because it makes course easy to digest and retain by delivering information in bite-sized chunks. Neuroscientists have proven that our attention span is limited to a short amount of time, typically anywhere between 6 to 10 minutes. After that, our attention starts to wane. Chunking content into shorter segments and then allowing learners time to digest is the best way to learn, they recommend. Give students the opportunity to recall and review information, therefore committing it to their long-term memory by spacing out the content. Keep their brains engaged by delivering content in different formats, thinking about videos, voiceover slides, audio, text, and panel discussions. It's also important to form a community of inquiry, and this is difficult for us as librarians, especially when we're going into one-shot sessions, but it is still important. Students persist with online learning when they feel connected to you, to their peers, and to the course content. While you don't have to video lecture, your lessons should include a human element. In particular, include what you think about the lesson, what you want to learn, and some ways for them to discuss, share, and reflect. And finally, multiple ways of engaging and interacting with content, with one another, and with us. Online education provides instructors with multiple avenues for communicating with students and getting students to engage and interact with the content. When designing instructional sessions, it's important to refrain from sticking to one mode of delivery and instead break up learning by utilizing multiple formats. I encourage utilizing an assessment method or learning activity, or both, that allows students to see one another, talk to one another, work together, reflect together, and think about how students can identify learning outcomes and engage with learning. So I wanted to ask of you, what are some online tools you utilize to foster engagement? Please plop them down in the chat box, and we will start to populate our crowdsourced list of solutions for online engagement tools. Some of the ones that I typically use when I'm teaching a synchronous online session include Zoom polls, Zoom breakout rooms, Kahoot, and Poll Everywhere. So we'll take a moment and see what people, oh yeah, lots of Padlet. I like Padlet too. And then Christine, are you populating it right now? And we'll take a look.
I am. I don't know if you saw my thumbs up. I just really like kind of frantically look up.
Let's see, it'll start to populate here. There we go. So we have Jamboard, we've used that before. Mentimeter, which I think is another polling software. Padlet is great, I love it. Google Docs, also great. Whiteboard, I've actually never heard of, so that's interesting. What else we got here? Microsoft Forms.
I've never heard of Socrative either.
Right, there's just so many tools out there, and they all have their own nuances, and I'm sure you all know, but like you can look at your Center for Teaching and Learning or another institution's Center for Teaching and Learning, and they typically have a list of engagement tools or even online video tools, and they have recommendations and like kind of like a rating system as what to use when you're online. So definitely use that. Whiteboard pre-surveys are great, yeah. These are great, some great answers. And Christina's just writing them all down, and we'll reshare the slides with this updated information so that one, I can take a look at it and see what I can adapt to my own lessons, but also for you guys to take a look at what other library instructors are using when they are engaging students online. So I'm going to proceed, and Christine will still continue to populate. And then I believe, Kevin, it's back to you.
Awesome, thank you so much. So we're gonna launch into some tips, tricks, and hacks, and the three of us each have a little something to share. Our tips, tricks, and hacks are gonna be loosely based on our theme of improvise, adapt, and overcome, though you can certainly fit many of these recommendations into one or more of these headings. As a co-op student, I've spent a lot of time learning, observing, collaborating, learning some more. And these are my recommendations from someone who's still very much in the infancy of exploring virtual instruction, online learning, and the teaching and learning landscape in general. So for Improvise here, just to lead us off, is the use of polling or quizzes early on in sessions to gauge student needs. And I saw a comment about a pre-survey as well, and this may be similar to that. So you may have a plan, you may think that you understand what students need to learn, but a poll or quiz early on in a lecture can really inform you greatly. You may think you want to spend 10 minutes on Boolean operators, but so a quiz or a poll early on may show you that information evaluation is a bigger gap or more important to your class. In an econ session that I did, co-delivered with a librarian on my team, a short video was recorded that students watched prior to the session. We began the class with a quick quiz, and we're surprised to find that concept mapping and coming up with a research question was a much larger interest and need than something like Boolean operators. We adjusted on the fly. We made sure that we had enough time to give attention to what the students really wanted. This isn't to say that other topics suffered. They were still discussed, and information was still available in the pre-recorded video. Secondly, is just give yourself some breathing room, account for potential technology issues as an example. When I think back to the poll, it's something that we've all kind of experienced. Everything seems to take longer online. We're doing a lot more. We're handling more things. Build in buffers for online presentations. It's not abnormal to have a slow start, be interrupted by students with questions in the chat. Account for that. Don't be so rigid in your agenda that you can't make those adjustments. And just know that issues are going to happen. Have a backup plan in place as best you can. Make sure that you're giving yourself that breathing room. I think that everybody kind of understands that the online environment isn't perfect, and they accept and perhaps even appreciate that not everything is perfect sometimes. For Adapt, the first piece here is just matching content focus to the dynamics of the class. So adapting can take so many forms, and it often goes hand in hand with improvising synchronous session. We continue to adapt to the online learning environment. Instructors and students alike we're all still trying to get a handle on this. I worked on a class workshop with a fellow librarian that has historically been delivered in person. We adapted to the online environment by essentially matching the dynamics of our workshop to how the instructor had organized the class. In this case here, students got together on teams and had a group discussion in one room, but then also had their separate breakout rooms as well, where they were to complete their assignments. So instead of physically walking around the room while students were completing their workshop activity, we jumped from room to room, and students could tag us in Microsoft Teams if they wanted us to jump into their room if they had a question. It was probably the closest to an in-person workshop that I had the opportunity to experience. It went really, really well. Secondly here is just around ensuring students have tangible takeaways from the session. Definitely not a new concept to online learning, but what students are taking away may change slightly. We have our learning outcomes. We try to make meaning for students, but paying attention online can be a lot more difficult, particularly when it's not, the instruction session may not be coming from their professor. So instead of, or even in addition to sharing slides, I've taken to developing cheat sheets for students with key links and concepts to find, saving them from having to scour their entire PowerPoint presentation. Recording your lecture, posting the cheat sheet and your presentation to the course site, or even if there's a course research guide, can be really, really important as well. Make sure the students know where to access that material. And finally, overcome. I think this is where a lot of us are spending a lot of our time right now. First and foremost, don't be afraid to experiment, fail, learn. This goes back to the whole theme of today. Don't be afraid to do things differently. If it doesn't work, that's fine. Adjust for the next time. Do things a little differently. Continue to move forward and share your experiences. As I've said before, this is so new to everyone. We've all felt lost. Don't feel like you're the only one in the void that doesn't have it all figured out, because none of us do yet. And last but not least, humanize the experience. Instruct and lead from beside, not in front. So students have their professors. Present yourself as someone who wants to bring in expertise and knowledge to the students. Approach it as a partner instead of from an authority. I think that online, some of this can be lost virtually. So create that comfortable atmosphere. Do live sessions. Make mistakes, and just make that experience comfortable for everybody. And that's generally just by being yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. That's great. So I'm going to continue on with my tips, tricks, and hacks, also in that same format. And it's repeating the things I've said before, but I just want to emphasize all these points. Flexibility and engaging with content. Students learn online content better when they are exposed to it in a few different ways. And one strategy to adopt is in each lesson when teaching students the new thing, present it in a few different ways. Thinking about something for students to read, something to watch, listen to, and something to do. Also, utilize open education resources. Some of us might be hesitant. We think we need to create all this content ourselves, film ourselves for an hour talking our usual spiel or a lecture. Utilize open educational resources. It's time consuming for us to translate everything into an online format. And by utilizing OERs, it allows you to save time so that you can focus on other aspects of your instructions. It's also important to note that many OERs were produced prior to the pandemic and are high quality and have high production value and can be used to create a powerful learning experience for students. Also thinking about picking the right tool for the job. As we just seen, there are so many tools out there that you can utilize. What's the best for you and what's the best for your students to actually get your points across? So students learn best when they interact with the content and each other to apply their new knowledge and make connections to what they already know. And so we need to consider the best platforms where these meaningful interactions are supported by the technology and build in opportunities for reflecting on the learning activity. Thinking under adapt, simplicity is key. I've gone over this before. Stay focused on what really matters, and it usually isn't the little things. Create micro lectures, and this is going back to that attention span issue. Students are overwhelmed with both asynchronous and synchronous content. The pandemic is causing a lot of stress, and it's showing in the degree of success with students learning. And so by creating these micro lectures, they allow students to engage with the content when they can and when they need to, and they can repeat it. So experienced online educators recommend using micro lectures, and typically they're videos of 6 minutes or less. And this makes sense. Rather than lecturing all our concepts in one big long video, micro lectures are the individual chunks of content students need to build up to the learning outcome. Each chunk is then limited to 6 minutes or under. And so it doesn't mean that you need to teach them everything within that 6 minutes, but rather you reserve the most important things that you need to say to a student's face for those 6 minutes, and use other media like readings, activities, links, and discussions for delivering the other content. Or you split up your lesson in a couple different micro lecture videos that students can return to when they're able to concentrate. And finally, thinking about ensuring accessibility. Let me touch upon this. And this is a big issue that we are coming to face with when we are teaching online, and it's something that's falling on the back burner for many of us. Regardless of whether a student relies on assistive technology or not, having course materials that don't create barriers to learning is an ongoing need for students in online education. Taking minor steps towards accessibility improvement of course materials is a good practice for educators to engage on a frequent and periodic basis. I just wanted to highlight here under Zoom unfortunately doesn't have this capability, but if you are screen sharing from PowerPoint or from Google Slides, I should say, or Microsoft PowerPoint, they actually do closed captions. So as you can see here, and it does a pretty good job. The only thing that they say to think about is ask your students if they want it, because it can be distracting. So certain students prefer it, certain students do not. Make sure you think about that. I'm gonna turn it off, however, mainly because it will only close caption my voice and not Christine's or Kevin's, because I'm the one screen sharing. So that's one of the pitfalls of this, but if you are a solo lecturer, definitely something to consider. And I just want to end on overcome, thinking about the backwards design process. Online learning is a lot different from what we're used to, and a backward design process can help ensure that our lessons are achieving our lesson outcomes and meeting our students' needs. Thinking about what's the best way for students to show that they understand the concepts can allow us to lead a successful online session. I also want to talk about elevating your energy. You cannot see my body language at all. My facial expression may be if I'm looking directly at the camera. And so what we need to do as instructors is elevate our energy so that students feel engaged and feel comfortable enough to engage with us in an online environment. I have a link here that I wanted to show you, and I'm not sure if how many of you have seen this video before, but I personally love it, and I think it's testament to what kindergarten teachers and elementary school instructors have to go through right now with online learning. And so if it works, give me one moment. It's a TikTok of a kindergartner teacher engaging with students online. And if you've seen it, you will know what's about to come. Let's see, and I'm hoping it's going to load successfully.
The number 4. Oh, I see Bryn is holding up 2 and 2. That will also make 4. I see 4 and 0. That is 4. What kind of pictures do we see over on our number 4? Can you raise your hand? What's a picture that you see over here on our number 4? Grayson, go ahead and turn your microphone on for me. What kind of picture do we see? Can you get your microphone on so we can hear ya? Yeah, what's a picture that you see, Grayson?
For some reason, it wasn't working.
Oh, but do you have it working now? It sounds like I can hear you.
Yeah.
So what's a picture that you see?
I see classic kids.
Oh my goodness. The number 4.
And so I personally adore that. That's just a testament to what kindergartner teachers have to go through and the level of energy that they need in order to engage with those students. And of course, we're not teaching kindergartners, but the same concepts apply. Like if we are engaged when we are teaching, if our energy levels are high, if we show an interest in what we're teaching students, they will be interested as well, and they will engage with it as well. So something to think about with that, with regards to that. And I just want to end on embrace the pause and embrace the chaos. As we saw today, and as we see many times in our online sessions, it is absolutely silent. When you ask a question, nobody will respond. And it's important to accept that it's going to be silent and embrace that pause and wait and keep on waiting. Not 15 seconds, not 20 seconds, 45 seconds. And that seems really long when you're online, but that's what you need in order for students to have time to think about the question that you're asking of them and be able to respond in the chat, raise their hand, whatever it may be. And also going back to like what Kevin talked about, what Christine talked about, what I've talked about, embrace the chaos. Online teaching is not perfect. We are not perfect. Technology is not perfect. And that's okay. And it's better to embrace it and not worry about it and acknowledge that like I'm human, we're all going through this together, that's okay. And so I'm just gonna go and move it on to Christine.
All right, thank you very much. So I was going to take a slightly different track and just talk a little bit about specifically like one-on-one learning situations, particularly in and around research consultations. So in what I refer to as the before times, I had almost 2 years of experience working on the classic research and reference desk. So I was used to answering in-person, rapid-fire research questions on a broad range of topics, and I was in a position to get to know students on a first-name basis in some of these libraries. In September 2020, I offered my first online research consultation, and there were some unexpected differences between the two, despite the fact that it was still a one-on-one collaborative learning experience. So in the Improvise stage, university libraries turned to video conferencing tools to replicate the consultation experience. I've become proficient with Zoom and Microsoft Teams, and I'm sure there will be new ones in the future. The important piece here is the screen sharing option on both platforms. So for any viewers who haven't done this type of research consultation, a big part of that learning experience involves showing students how to navigate a database and how to troubleshoot a search in real time. And of course, libraries are also shifting to emailing resources to students in instances where questions were shorter, maybe had fewer moving pieces to them. So as I got more familiar with this improvised workspace, I also started to adapt and add new approaches to these consultations. So a few ways that I adapted to this situation was doing things like adding extra descriptions. So even though students can see your screen, you still need to explain what you're doing. So a lot of my examples were cases where I'd say, you know, so if you look in the upper right-hand corner, I'm circling my mouse around a little checkbox that says, you know, search key terms and the like. So you'll get tired of explaining all of that, and that's totally okay. Not being able to point at things on your screen has been really challenging. So also make sure you have a glass of water with you because you're going to be doing a lot of talking. But this is also actually a really great way to practice making your own presentations accessible, given that it's important to describe visual elements on the screen for students as well. So I've been trying to take it as a chance to kind of up my skills in that area. Also, I was doing something similar to Kevin where I was creating consultation cheat sheets. So in this new environment, I actually had time to prep before a consult, which was a very new experience. So as a part of my prep, I would do things like making a personalized cheat sheet that included links to research guides and links to key databases. I would include pre-written tips on searching a database. So it might be stuff like Boolean operators or like how to save a search on a certain platform and things like that. And then I would also list keywords that the student and I tried during the consult. So essentially I wanted a student to be able to focus on our interaction and to not worry about needing to frantically take notes while I was talking to them. I also started adding verbal and written upsells to other library resources, namely to databases called Criterion and Audio Cine. Both of these are movie streaming platforms. So I always use that as a chance to upsell students and tell them that they could, you know, like cancel their Netflix subscription. So it's a great way, again, to humanize yourself, to just showcase the breadth of the resources that are available at your library, and also to act as kind of like a casual reminder for students to also take breaks and to unwind as well. Next, I also allowed students to share their screens with me while we were in the middle of these type of consults. I got this idea from a colleague of mine, Heather Campbell at Western, because I was struggling with this part of the consult. So again, from the before times, I would typically have a student duplicating searches either on their device, or I would let them sit down at my computer to run some sample searches. But of course, you can't do that online. But if you do let the students share their screen, you can at least get them to walk through the searches and to offer that guidance from the side that Kevin was talking about earlier, which can also reinforce their own learning so that they know what to do when they come back and you're not there. And then last, you can enhance your background. So this might not be available to everyone, but I was luckily able to set up a separate office space in my apartment and made sure to put personal books behind me. And of course, I was a bookseller in a former career, so I'm partial to like my merchandising setup. So for me anyways, this was an immediate visual icebreaker for students, and we got to talk about non-school related things before switching into research talk. And of course, for me, I'm always really interested to see like what people focus on first, because kind of helps me with like, just telling them about other, again, non-research related things as well. So now that I'm moving into the overcome stage, I realize that the biggest change that I'm still learning to accept is, again, the fact that there's no need for on-screen perfectionism. So while you do need to prep for a consultation, you have to give yourself permission to not be perfect. A really important part of these consults is to let the students see how you troubleshoot problems or how you get yourself out of mistakes that you make. In our current online environment, we're missing opportunities for observation even among our colleagues, and I feel like students are feeling this even more acutely than we are, I would argue. Last, one of my key takeaways from this online learning experience is to give students what I call community reminders. So remind students that they're part of a campus community, even if that community has moved online. So this means it's important for library staff to learn about campus events and services so that you can point students to these things, whether they've asked about them or not, and maybe especially if they haven't asked about them. This is a big part of my own shift to leading with empathy and trying to invite students into campus life in a safe and responsible way as well. So that's the end of my tips and tricks. So we're going to open this up to any kind of discussion. If folks had wanted to follow up on something that either I said or Julia or Kevin, or if you wanted to add maybe some other tips or tricks that you've used in the classroom, or maybe something that you've done on kind of like a one-on-one learning environment, like please feel free to share some of those right now.
Christine, there's a question for you from Aneta, and she asked, did you share this cheat sheet before the consultation or after? Or did you work on during the session?
Yeah, so for me so far, what I've been doing is I had been sharing them after the session, but I think that's something that I would like to change going forward. Like even if there's, particularly with stuff that, if it's like a pre-written component, I feel like that's something that you could share at the start. I just find as well, it kind of ties in with some of what Julia was saying, where you want to make things like easily digestible. Trying to keep somebody online for an hour for like a database walkthrough, that can be like really exhausting too. So that is something that I would like to change going forward, just because I was trying to send it as like the perfect package, but I think it might be more meaningful if you're actually working on the sheet at the same time.
There's a lot of really good discussion around, screen pointers or screen drawing, which I think is really interesting, because it sounds like it's probably something that we've all struggled with before, which is highlighting, the point, the place on your screen that you might be talking about. And there's some really good options here, a lot of which I've never heard of. So thank you everybody for sharing.
There's a question to all of us, and Nadine asked, any experience with convincing students to view the asynchronous lessons instead of one-shot instruction sessions? I've done a few where I split up what would be 30 minutes of talking into 3 distinct lessons so that they would be shorter, but had 1/3 of view the first time, less than 1/4 of the class view the other 2 by the time they had worked on their research papers. So that's a really important question to ask, and it's difficult to answer. if you can, and if you can negotiate with the professor that you're teaching a lesson for, and having those modules or asynchronous content count towards a grade, whether they need to answer a quiz or something like that, that's always the best option, because students are motivated by grades, aren't they? They are motivated if they see value in it. And it's hard. I don't know if anybody else has any answers or thoughts with regards to that, but yeah.
I would love to hear what the group has to say about this. My personal quick insights, and I mean my experience on the asynchronous side is very limited. Was a nursing module that was quite long. It was 10 modules long. The cheat sheet that we had talked about was actually kind of gated behind passing the final quiz. And you know, I would call it successful in that a lot of students completed each module, which unlocked the quiz, which in turn unlocked the cheat sheet. So, you know, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of kind of like dangling that carrot or withholding something from students, but you know, as that module went live at the beginning of the term, I think it was you know, a great incentive for students to complete the whole module.
Yeah, and Joanne mentioned same experience for me, Nadine. Even though students got grades for completing the lesson/modules, only about 1/3 completed them. And I think it is also to show that like students are overwhelmed by all the content they have to complete. Like from what I've heard from certain students, undergrads, grad students, the switch to asynchronous specifically has been really hard because it's just a flood of information. And unless if you have your time management under like you're not procrastinating, you have good time management skills, like it just they are buried. And so it's definitely a balancing act. It needs to be short, it needs to be quick, it needs to be snappy, and they need to get the information that they want when they want it. And yeah, it's not easy to do, that's for sure.
I think as well the challenge is, and like not as a to blame us for it, but it's also you've got teachers who have grown up learning in an in-person environment and are used to that in-person interaction, and you've got students who also are like in that frame of mind of learning in-person instruction, and then to suddenly have, you know, your full course load online, like that can be not only jarring to us because we're still trying to figure out how to lead those sessions. It's also very jarring for the students too. So it's kind of like I try to approach it as just trying to remind people of that too, in kind of like subtle ways. Yeah, just as an understanding that we're all kind of in new territory that we hadn't considered before.
Ben has his hand raised. Ben, if you can unmute yourself, please feel free and you can ask away or comment. Or maybe that was an oopsie, or no. Ben, I'm not hearing anything. I don't know if you have something to ask or something to say. All right, I'm not hearing anything.
I would say too, we are getting closer to the end of the session, so I'm not sure if maybe we want to like jump ahead just to make sure that we cover everything too.
Yeah, let's do that. And with the remaining time, then we can have a further discussion, I should say. All right, teaching philosophies.
All right, so as we said throughout this presentation, like the three of us are all early career librarians and we're still learning more about how we personally approach teaching. So given the wide scale changes we're all dealing with right now, it's also an opportunity for mid-career and later career librarians to reflect on the evolution of their own role as an educator. So the link that we've put here is a link to the Center for Teaching and Learning at Western Libraries, and they have an excellent guide on how to write what's called a teaching philosophy statement. So this statement is a written description of your own values, your goals, your beliefs about teaching and learning, and it's a chance to reflect on how your personal context has shaped your approach to education. So for example, I've talked a bit about teaching with empathy during our presentation today. Empathy has always been an important value of mine, and I've gone to great efforts to get things like mental health first aid training so I can help students who are feeling overwhelmed and don't know where to go. But I'm finding in this online context, I'm aware that students and myself as well are dealing with new levels of social isolation. And I always try to look for ways that we can let students know, that I can personally let them know that I'm in the same boat and that we'll make things work just as best as we can. So I know Kevin had a few more points that he wanted to add to this slide as well.
Yeah, just really quickly here. My perspective on teaching philosophy is quite unique, given that I had no formal in-class teaching prior to this co-op, and it's all been remote. And working with everyone to figure this out, the shift to online learning, virtual delivery, has kind of, in a way, been the ultimate equalizer, where everybody is working to figure these things out together, which I think has been an incredible experience from my perspective. On our team, when we have discussed virtual teaching and learning, it's been great that my perspective has been valued and asked for on a regular basis. I think it's interesting because I come with no formal classroom experience, and my ideas and suggestions aren't, they're not always clouded by that, well, we've always done it this way type mentality. Experience certainly has an important role, but not having anything to draw on, and it can sometimes, spur on new ideas and create this great collaborative discussion. So it was really neat to have kind of all levels of experience on our team as we were going through this journey together. I think lastly, just being able to approach these as a student is really interesting as well, and having that perspective. And I think it's something that we've talked about a lot, and Christine talks a lot about empathy. It's just keeping the student needs and their learning journey in mind, and incorporating that into your teaching philosophy is quite important. So I just wanted to make sure I touched on that.
I was saying as well, like, this is a really great time to keep going with that improvising and adapting to the new scenario. We're describing this as like a really, almost like an etch-a-sketch moment in our like professional lives, where, for a lot of new folks coming in, we're really kind of starting at the same point as a lot of our, like what Kevin was saying, a lot of our like older peers who have been librarians for a much longer period of time. And yet, just as we're all trying to deal with the same situation, it's kind of exciting, I would say, as a new librarian, just to know that your approaches and your, experimentation with courses is going to be kind of the same thing that your older colleagues are going through as well, which is fantastic and interesting as well. So, and then, yeah, I think we're good for the last slide. Okay. So I'm an optimist, and I feel that we've made it to the overcome stage at this point. So for academic librarians, we've survived an unpredictable fall term, and we have more experience now with creating online library instruction. But we do have, just as a group, we have some lingering questions about what our work is going to look like in the future. So most of our questions are for a post-COVID world and include just some of the following as starting points. So we were wondering, will online learning still take up as much space in library instruction going forward? Is this going to be a time where we're really going to shift to an entirely hybrid model of instruction, or maybe there'll be cases where we're fully online with certain courses? Another question was, how will we integrate our new online instruction skills when we shift back to an in-person environment? So I know for me and for Kevin, like all of our instruction experience has been in an online environment. So what will our instruction look like when we're actually standing in front of a classroom full of people? Will professors want more asynchronous library integration with their online content? So another question kind of is, will this lead to better integration with courses overall? Will this be the end of the one-shot session? Are we planting the seeds right now for a bigger library presence in classrooms going forward? And then just as a last question, will research consultations or consults in general still take place predominantly online, since it's much easier for students to attend? We were talking about this earlier and just saying, like, this is opening up opportunities for more students to gain access to library services, particularly for students who are already in an online learning environment. They suddenly have new access points to the library that might not have existed before, just because there wasn't the push for us to have to innovate in order to meet student needs. So I think now really is the time to refocus on what we're doing, what we want to do, and pretty much what we want to achieve going forward as well.
That's great, Christine. So I think now we have 6 minutes before the end of the session. So if anybody has any questions, if anybody has answers to Christine's questions, You can plop them into the chat or raise your hand and one of the hosts can unmute you and then you can go ahead and ask your question. I think it's been a minute. Nadine commented in the chat with Christine's question about the potential end of one-shot instruction sessions. Any thoughts on how to assess impact or use this in our merit and promotion process? That's a really good question.
Yeah, because I feel like, I feel like with developing asynchronous content, I mean, you're already developing almost like those, what was it, like you were saying, Kevin, like the tangible takeaways, right? Like you're creating an entire, you know, online suite of materials that students can use. And that's going to require like regular updating as well as new resources become available, or as like, you know, I know for the university libraries anyway, with like the introduction of Omni, like that's introduced a massive amount of work just to update a lot of different guides in order to walk students through how to actually use the catalog and stuff like that. I'm curious, just because, I mean, you are going to be creating almost like far more, yeah, like more like tangible deliverables that I think had been created before, I want to say. Like, I know we're all still like early career folks, so it's like we're still kind of getting our feet under us too. But yeah, I kind of feel like if you're already at the point of like building an online course that could be attached to like a course module that a teacher is doing, like I feel like that's got to hold some kind of weight, or like if that's going to actually change how we're going to yeah, like if that's going to change almost like what our job requirements are going forward. I don't know if you guys have, I think the two of you have a little more experience with actually like creating a lot of the asynchronous content that like teachers have been using this, like this term particularly.
I mean, with the learning management softwares or the course management softwares or systems, like you can collect stats as to how many people have actually accessed your content. And it gives us the opportunity to think about if any of you are familiar with curriculum mapping or scaffolding of content, right? Thinking about like what information literacy skills or what kind of sessions do we want to be presenting students at what stages within their undergraduate career or graduate career, thinking about that. And then like being able to utilize the resources that we have available, resources being humans, people, librarians, and capturing that through asynchronous online content that can be repurposed for multiple courses. I like Shelley's comment about she's happy to continue to run one-on-one research consults online. And I think that goes back to like Christine's point of like, this forced us to be innovative, because prior to this, I know when I was working at a previous role, they were considering having the option of online research consultations. And there was a lot of hesitancy and pushback, to say the least. And now that's the only option we have, other telephones. So, you know, it's definitely forced us to take a look at what services we're providing and what we want to achieve with the work that we're doing. We have one more minute. And Mike Chi has a great point here in the comment. He stated that asynchronous resources support the flipped classroom approach, providing a means for students to gain background information and then get towards application of learning in interactive synchronous sessions. And that's exactly, that's totally true. And, you know, both as a pre-content as well as post live session or in-person sessions, like this asynchronous online material is going to be very interesting, and how we're going to adapt it to the future, which is hopefully coming soon. I am cognizant of time, and I believe everybody has their lunch break right now if you are following the symposium for the whole day. So it's 12 o'clock right now. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email us. It is in the slides. If I go back to them, oh, you do have our contact information. We will update the slides with that crowdsourced information. And Kelly did mention that if you want a transcript of the chat, which I think I definitely do, you can email her, and she's taking the screenshots of the chat, because there's a lot of great information that you've shared throughout this presentation, and I want to thank you for that.
So as we said earlier, yeah, like thank you for talking shop with us too, because that was our goal, was to, like, we had formed our own kind of community of practice at Western when the three of us like were all there, and we were hoping to like duplicate that for you guys, like just to get that vibe. So hopefully you found some value in this conversation too.
All right, with that.
So thank you so much for that excellent presentation. That was fantastic. And I just wanted to let everybody know we did take screenshots of the chat, but we're actually trying to figure out if a transcript is being saved into the Zoom account that we're using, because we're actually trying to download it too, because that would obviously be easier than screenshots and way more accessible. But we are going to try to troubleshoot that on our end. So I will be actually closing the Zoom room now. It will probably open up again around 12:20. Unfortunately, most of the e-learning planners have dogs, and we now have to go take our dogs for a walk. So I hope everybody enjoyed the morning so far, and thank you so much for all of your excellent participation. And oh, perfect. I see that Kevin was able to copy and paste the chat. That's excellent. I was trying to do it and I wasn't able to. So Kevin, if you could kindly send that to me by email, then we'll work on getting that out to folks. So thank you so much, everybody. And we'll see hopefully all of you around 12:30 today. Oh, and just as an FYI, please make sure that your Zoom name that you're using is the same as what you registered with, or at least your email address or something. So, because when we're admitting folks from the waiting room, that's what we're using to check against registration. So just please make sure that your Zoom name is up to date in that way. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you this afternoon.
Thank you now.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.